Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're unraveling a family fracture so sharp it split along bloodlines and left silence in its wake. Imagine a long dining table, silver, polished candles flickering gently, and the seat at the end is suddenly permanently empty. That's how it begins. A mother, a message, and a reckoning you might not survive if you've ever placed blind trust in the people who share your last name. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Now turn off the lights, maybe get a fan going for some soft noise, and let's dive into tonight's journey together. My name is Elaine Whitmore, and I never thought my own son would orchestrate my exile. But here we are. It happened on a Wednesday. Not a dramatic day by any means. The sun hung politely over Manhattan traffic below, grumbled the way it always does, and I was dressed in a silk robe, sipping green juice while watching the morning clouds curl over the skyline from my 48th floor apartment. My phone buzzed, a notification from the Whitmore family group chat. I smiled reflexively. Maybe someone was sharing photos from last weekend's garden brunch. Or maybe Piper, my daughter-in-law, had found yet another designer shoe she simply had to broadcast. But no, it was from my son, Calvin. Mom, we've all talked, and we've decided it's best if we cut ties. Please don't come to family dinners anymore. This is what's healthiest for everyone. I stared, blinking, then reading again. The way your eyes do when something hurts so bad your brain tries to reframe it as a typo. No typo. My brother-in-law Simon left it on red. My niece Kayla reacted with a thumbs up. And Piper, she added a laughing emoji with tears. That was the moment I stopped being a mother and became a mission. I took a screenshot. Not because I wanted proof for court, not yet, but because that's the first rule of surviving betrayal: collect evidence while they think you're still stunned. I scrolled back through the messages. Missed birthdays, private trips I'd never been told about, photos of Thanksgiving spreads I hadn't helped make. My name had vanished from conversations months ago. I just hadn't wanted to see it. They'd slowly erased me in silence. Piper's most recent post, a champagne toast in the Hamptons. Everyone radiant in white. My furniture in the background, my favorite porcelain vase holding roses at the center of the table I'd inherited from my mother. They'd used my legacy to stage my absence. I felt something in me stretch tight and sharp, like the first fray of fabric before it tears. I stood up, walked barefoot across the tile floor, and placed the phone gently on the marble counter next to the landline I hadn't used in years. The number I dialed had sat dormant in my memory like a relic, but I'd kept it there for this very moment. 2 rings. A voice, dry and amused Whitmore. "It's Elaine," I said. "I think it's time." There was a pause, then a slow, dangerous laugh. "I was wondering when you'd call." "Well," I said, twisting the pearl ring on my finger. "Wonder no more. How soon can you meet?" "For you," she said. "Give me an hour." I hung up and caught my reflection in the chrome of the espresso machine. Something about the way I was standing looked unfamiliar. My chin tilted just slightly higher than it had before. My eyes sharper. Less fog, more clarity. Calvin wanted to cut ties. Excellent. I'd hand him the scissors myself, with razors so fine he wouldn't feel the cut until his kingdom started to crumble beneath him. The phone buzzed again. Calvin calling now, his office number. I declined. It rang again, and again I let it. What a symphony of desperation. Just yesterday I was background noise. Today I was a siren, wailing in his conscience. I typed one message into the family chat. Message received, loud and clear. Enjoy your last family dinner. Then I left the group. Some bridges are burned. Others you rig with gasoline and walk away in stilettos as they explode behind you. Today, I felt cinematic. Then, by the time my guest arrived, the afternoon light had turned my apartment gold. My doorman Brian buzzed up, "Mrs. Whitmore, your guest is here. Send her up." And Brian, "No interruptions for the next 2 hours." "Understood, ma'am." The elevator chimed. Out stepped a woman who looked like she'd eaten and digested Wall Street for breakfast. Tall, tailored, and terrifying. Carolina Delaney. corporate attorney, asset strategist, and the last person you call when you want your problems to vanish without leaving a paper trail. Elaine, she said, air-kissing both cheeks. You look like vengeance in pearls. I haven't even started yet. We sat in the living room where I'd already laid out a spread of contracts, financial records, and a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. Carolina crossed her legs, sipping champagne. This is your 48.7% in Whitmore Holdings. I nodded, and I want to sell. To you. She blinked. To me. You buy the shares. But with a caveat. A clause that allows you to execute a forensic audit, management restructuring, and the removal of any party engaged in financial misconduct. And you think there's something there? Oh, I know there's something there, I said, flipping open the folder. Calvin's been siphoning funds for years. And Piper, well, let's just say the Children's Arts Initiative has paid for a lot of handbags. Carolina whistled. You've been busy. For 3 years. Why wait until now? I turned toward the window. Because now, I have nothing left to lose. She signed the preliminary documents in silence, then raised her glass. To new beginnings. To justice, I said, and clicked my glass against hers with a sound as sharp as truth. Carolina left just before sunset, her briefcase heavy with signatures and sealed intent. I stood at the window long after she disappeared into the tide of Manhattan traffic, watching taillights glow like embers in the dying light. Down below, the city pulsed with deals, secrets, betrayals. Up here, I felt weightless. There's a strange stillness in the moment just before a life changes, like the hush before a storm, when the birds go silent and even the wind holds its breath. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was anxious, but because I was wide awake for the first time in years. My body, my thoughts, even the air felt electric. I moved through the apartment in soft socks and silence, organizing documents, lighting a candle that smelled like cedar and fig, and drafting a list titled, Everything They Thought I'd Never Know. A wisdom that comes with age. Most people don't cover their tracks nearly as well as they think. By morning, my inbox held Carolina's confirmation. Share transfer completed. Audit authorization greenlit. My revenge was officially a legal entity, and Calvin. He was about to discover that mothers don't just give birth to children, they can resurrect themselves too. The phone calls resumed around 8 a.m., this time from Piper. I declined them with a casual swipe. Then came the texts. Elaine, this has gone too far. We didn't mean it like that. Can we talk, please? Oh, how quickly the weather changes when you steal their umbrella. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened Piper's Instagram story, and there she was, at yet another brunch martini in hand, filming her avocado toast, while Calvin sat across from her with his face in his hands. Curious. And then it hit me, she was tagging the location. The Terrace Club, Midtown, less than 20 blocks from my apartment. And she'd posted 3 minutes ago. So I got dressed. Let me tell you something. Nothing tightens a guilty conscience like seeing the woman you just tried to erase walk into your safe space looking like she owns it. I wore navy, a fitted coat, a sharp collar, and a red lip that didn't ask permission to exist. When I stepped through the restaurant's glass doors, Calvin looked up and went pale. Piper dropped her phone. Elaine, she stammered. This isn't... Relax, I said smoothly, taking a seat beside them. I'm not here to cause a scene. That was true. The scene would come later. Right now, I wanted them squirming. Mom. Calvin said, voice low, What are you doing? Having brunch, I said, lifting the menu. Don't worry, I won't order the lobster omelet. I know it's rough when you're under audit. His jaw twitched. Carolina Delaney, I continued glancing up, says she's quite looking forward to reviewing your financials, especially the ones from the Whitmore Foundation. Piper dropped her fork. You're bluffing. No, I said calmly, I'm finally calling your bluff. I turned to Calvin. You wanted to cut ties, remember, so I did. You made me irrelevant, a liability. Well, now I'm neither. He stared at me like he was seeing something unfamiliar, something dangerous. And he was. Because I was no longer his mother. I was his reckoning. That afternoon, I got the call from Luke. He'd been my only tether to the idea of family. My 20-year-old grandson with an old soul and a heart too big for his own good. "Grandma," he said barely above a whisper, "Dad's been saying things." "What sort of things?" "That you're unstable, that you've always resented him, that this is all about revenge." I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly. "And what do you believe?" "I believe you took me to every science fair I ever entered, even the one where my volcano exploded on your coat," he said. "I believe you taught me how to make your lemon bars from scratch, and you never forgot my debate tournaments. I believe you love harder than anyone I know." His voice cracked. "I think they're scared of you because they know you see them clearly now." A pause. "I do," I whispered. Luke exhaled. "Then whatever you're doing, keep going." He didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. He knew the weight of silence, and he knew I'd carried it too long. That night, I lit a fire in the hearth and reviewed the audit report Carolina's team had already begun assembling, page after page. Unauthorized bonuses, fabricated consulting fees, a wellness retreat in Napa disguised as executive development, Piper's $19,000 workwear wardrobe. It was all there. And tucked between the pages was a casual bombshell Calvin had requested power of attorney 2 years ago. Drafted documents, never filed them. But the intention, it was there. He'd planned to take everything, not just my company, my autonomy, my identity. I leaned back in the armchair and let that sink in. There's a debate I've heard on podcasts at dinner parties about whether power changes people or just reveals them. I think it peels them back like citrus. And Calvin, he was sour to the core. Ding! At dawn, I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a photograph. Calvin, age 6, sitting on my lap at the old piano, one sock missing, gap-toothed grin. He used to beg for lullabies before bed. "Sing the one with the moon again, Mama," he'd say. And I always did. I set the photo down and walked away. That boy was gone. And the man he became, he taught me something I wished I'd learned sooner. The worst betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people who hand you the knife, ask for a hug, and smile as they push. The next morning, the New York air had that early spring edge, crisp, but not cruel. The kind of day that tricks you into optimism until a breeze slices through your coat and reminds you where you live. I woke up before the sun and stood at the window with coffee in hand, watching the city stir. Across the street, a bakery was setting out trays of croissants. I could almost smell the warmth and butter rising from their paper bags. It reminded me of when Calvin was young. He used to wake up early on Sundays just to help me knead dough in the kitchen. We'd listen to Sinatra on the radio, and I'd let him spill flour everywhere, even if it drove me a little mad. There's a quiet ache in remembering who someone used to be, especially when the present version seems unrecognizable. But I wasn't interested in mourning anymore. I had work to do. Carolina had sent the first set of subpoenas. The forensic team was combing through every vendor, every charity, every suspicious consultant that Calvin and Piper had siphoned money toward. And the deeper they dug, the messier it became. Fake invoices, shell companies, a beach house in St. Barth's under the name Lighthouse Holdings LLC, subtle as a neon sign. But what really did it for me, what made my hands shake with something colder than anger, was the discovery of a wellness grant worth $125,000 money that was supposed to fund cancer treatments for children. Piper had used it to renovate a guest bathroom. Gold fixtures, imported stone tile, a smart mirror that plays spa music. The invoice read, "Essential Wellness Renovation for Foundation Workspace." And here, I thought evil came in black capes and smoke. Turns out it wears linen robes and sips green juice. That afternoon, I called Luke. He was in the university library surrounded by other students, young, bright-eyed, and still under the illusion that justice was slow but fair. "You okay, Grandma?" he whispered. "I've seen monsters, sweetheart," I said. "But at least the ones under your bed never smiled while they stole your soul." He didn't respond for a second. "Then do you want me to come home this weekend?" I smiled. "Not yet. I need you where you are, focused, watching." Watching what? The narrative. How they spin it. Because I knew it was coming. The smear campaign. The sudden PR push from Calvin's team, painting me as the vindictive matriarch with a grudge. I was already getting word of whispers, people saying I was too emotional, unstable, jealous. Classic. When a man burns a house down, he's decisive. When a woman lights a match, she's unhinged. Let them talk. Let them underestimate. Because while they posted family brunches and damage controlled through publicists, I was laying bricks, quietly rebuilding a fortress they didn't know existed. One of the perks of being dismissed is they stop watching your hands, and mine, they were busy. Carolina called me that evening, her voice brisk with good news. We've frozen 3 of the 5 offshore accounts, she said. The Caymans pushed back a bit, but with the IRS involved, they're caving fast. I smiled into the phone. Anything on the Delacroix contracts, I asked. You were right, she said. They're fake. The Delacroix Foundation doesn't exist. It's just a P.O. box in Jersey and a voicemail that reroutes to Piper's assistant. I let out a breath that I hadn't realized I'd been holding for 3 years. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was wire fraud. My son and his wife weren't just greedy, they were criminal. And I was going to make sure everyone knew it. Elaine Carolina said gently, "This is going to get messy." I nodded. Good. Let them bleed in the spotlight for once. Now, the following week, Calvin made his first real move. A glossy magazine article, probably placed by his new PR team, featuring a photo of him and Piper all smiles under the headline, "Redefining Legacy, How the Rhodes Family Plans to Save Their Company and Their Name." I flipped through it while getting my hair done at the salon. Some gems included, after a difficult year marked by internal conflict, Calvin Rhodes remains committed to ethical leadership and family values. Elaine Rhodes, the former CEO and company co-founder, has struggled with stress-induced decision-making in recent years. And my favorite, while she is respected for her early contributions, her recent actions appear to be driven by emotion rather than business sense. My stylist Lana peeked at the article over my shoulder. "You gonna sue?" I smiled at her through the mirror. "No need. I already bought the battlefield." She blinked. "Metaphorically?" she asked. I just sipped my tea. "Let them throw stones," I said. "I'm laying concrete." And that night I had dinner alone. Not out of loneliness, no. Solitude has been a gift. It speaks the truth when the world lies. I sat by the window with a bowl of lentil soup jazz on the record player and the satisfaction of knowing that for the first time in years, I wasn't pretending to be okay. I was building something, a foundation not made of inherited loyalty or fear, but of truth. And Calvin, he was still swinging in the dark thinking I'd played defense. Poor thing. He never saw that I'd already gone on offense. The real turning point came on a Wednesday. Wednesdays have always had a weird energy stuck between momentum and exhaustion. But this one, it cracked open something I didn't know I was ready for. Carolina had just sent me the final audit. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, as she ran through the last items. "Elaine," she said, "we're done digging, and what we've found is enough to make a Wall Street shark blush." That's when she dropped the number 12.4 million. 12.4. That's how much Calvin and Piper had funneled out of the company since my so-called retirement. Fake vendors, inflated marketing budgets, consulting payments to friends, bonuses approved without board oversight, not to mention Piper's little habit of charging her yoga retreats to our mental wellness fund. I guess nothing says stress relief like a $14,000 week in Bali. I didn't speak for a long while. Carolina was quiet too. She knew what this meant. I wasn't just looking at family betrayal anymore. I was looking at federal-level criminal activity. My hands didn't shake. They didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, everything felt sharp, clear, surgical. This was the moment I stopped hoping Calvin would wake up, apologize, or become the man I raised. No, this was the moment I started preparing to bury him professionally by the book, by the law, and in broad daylight. Benny. I called Luke first. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Grandma, what's up?" I told him the number. There was silence. Then he stole that much. "Not just him," I said. "Your stepmother played her part." He sighed. "Do we go public now?" I smiled. Soon, but not yet. First we go legal, quietly. Then loud. Oh, very loud, sweetheart. Luke had always had that fire in him, the one I'd hoped would skip the generation in between. and thank God it had. He asked if I was scared. No, I said, not scared, just done being polite. Carolina and I met at a quiet cafe in Tribeca that afternoon. She came in with 2 leather-bound folders and the calm energy of a woman who enjoys paperwork more than parties. "We serve them this," she said, sliding one of the folders across the table, "or we go straight to the feds." Inside a full legal breakdown of the violations: fraud, embezzlement, tax, evasion, misuse of nonprofit funds. I sipped my tea. "Let's serve it," I said. She nodded. "I'll draft a notice. Give them 72 hours to respond. Either they cooperate or the Department of Justice gets a new file on their desk." I thought about Calvin getting that envelope, about Piper reading the fine print in her penthouse with a flute of champagne that suddenly tasted like vinegar. "They're going to panic," I said. "Good," Carolina replied. "Panic makes people sloppy, and sloppy people make excellent defendants." The letter went out by courier the next morning. Carolina didn't email it. She had it hand-delivered by a former Marine who now worked security detail. I don't know what Calvin's face looked like when he opened it, but I like to imagine it lost all its blood. He didn't call, didn't text. Instead, Piper posted a story of her smiling at some charity event. Caption, "Choose peace over drama." If that isn't a masterclass in projection, I don't know what is. Meanwhile, my inbox exploded with quiet messages. From board members, former colleagues, even distant relatives. "Elaine, is it true? I always had a bad feeling about them. Please let me know how I can help." Funny how silence breaks once someone else strikes the first blow. On day 2, Calvin blinked. Carolina called. "He lawyered up," she said. "Which firm?" She told me. I nearly laughed into my soup. "They handled his last divorce," I said. "He's going back to old playbooks." Desperation loves the familiar even when it's useless. "Let's press harder." "We can," she said. "But if we go forward, there's no crawling back from this." "I don't want to crawl," I said. "I want to walk calmly through the front doors of his delusion and tear down the curtains." Bon. That night, I took out the old photo album. The one with the leather binding, worn soft by time and fingertips. There was Calvin at 7, holding up a blue ribbon at the science fair. There was Piper at their wedding, smiling like she'd just won the lottery. Maybe she had. And there was me, in so many corners of their lives, invisible in real time, but etched into the background of every achievement. You give and give and give. Then they tell you you're too much. Then they tell you you're not enough. Then they try to replace you entirely. But I wasn't going to be erased. Not this time. This time, I was going to write the ending. And it wouldn't be a tragedy. It would be a blueprint. The third day hit like a wave. Carolina called at 8:12 a.m. earlier than usual. She doesn't do early unless something is burning. They've responded. I set down my tea. "Tell me everything." "They're proposing a settlement. Quiet, no admission of guilt, just compensation for your shares. At 3 times their value." I blinked. 3 times. That's not generosity. That's fear. They're hoping money will hush the fire. Let them hope. I asked her to send over the documents, then leaned back in my chair and stared out at the skyline. Manhattan was wrapped in morning haze, the kind that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. They really thought I'd take the money and vanish, as if peace could be bought, as if I hadn't already spent decades buying peace only to have it repossessed with one family group chat. Carolina's email arrived 5 minutes later. The documents were slick, well drafted, full of soft language designed to lull someone into silence. Settlement will be made in full. No further legal action required. All records sealed. I closed the file. Hard. Carolina, I texted draft my response, decline. No amount of money will fix what they broke. She sent back one word, understood. I decided to go for a walk. There's a stretch of Riverside Park I love, where the trees arch above the path like a cathedral of green. I needed space, distance, and the gentle hum of joggers and dogs chasing tennis balls. I thought about Calvin growing up, about how he used to ride his bike down our old driveway helmet, too big for his head feet, barely touching the pedals. About how he cried when he lost his first baseball game, and I bought him a banana split and told him some losses build better men. I remembered all of it. and I let the grief settle like fog in my lungs. Because this wasn't just betrayal. It was the funeral of a dream I'd spent 30 years building. The idea that family, when nurtured, will bloom. Sometimes it blooms poison. Luke met me for lunch. He was wearing his Columbia hoodie, hair a little messy, eyes sharp. Grandma, he said they're in full spin mode. How bad? He pulled out his phone and scrolled through screenshots. Social posts, press statements, carefully worded denials. Piper's latest blog post was titled, "When Women Are Targeted for Loving Too Hard." I nearly choked on my grilled cheese. She's painting herself as the victim. Luke smirked. Classic misdirection. They're trying to confuse the timeline. Make it seem like you retaliated because of a personal grudge, not financial misconduct. I nodded slowly. That's all right. Let them play checkers. We're playing chess. We walked to the bookstore after lunch because I needed something tactile. Something other than paifs and betrayal. I picked up a copy of The Art of War. Luke raised an eyebrow. A little dramatic, don't you think? Wisdom ages well, I said, flipping through the pages. Besides, it's good bedtime reading for people planning tactical destruction. Not destruction, he said gently. Reconstruction. I smiled. That boy always did know how to pull me back to center. Damn. That evening, Carolina and I held a strategy call. She had her lawyer face on, all jawline, and no blinking. They're hoping your age will work in their favor, she said, painting you as fragile, unstable, out of touch. Then we remind them I'm a retired CEO, not a forgotten casserole at a family reunion. She grinned. You want to go public? Not yet, but we leaked just enough to make them nervous. She paused. Controlled leaks. Controlled earthquakes, I said. Let's rattle their windows. So we did. We drafted an anonymous whistleblower email, sent it to 3 journalists who specialized in corporate fraud. Nothing too detailed, just enough breadcrumbs to invite curiosity. The next morning, headlines started to murmur. Unusual spending activity in a prominent New York family business. Whistleblower suggests financial misconduct tied to charitable accounts. Nothing explosive yet, but enough to make Calvin's phone start ringing. 2 days later, I received a handwritten note. Slid under my apartment door. No return address, just slanted, shaky handwriting. Mother, whatever anger you're carrying, please let it go. This doesn't have to end like this. Think of the family. Think of the legacy. Legacy. He really had the audacity to invoke that word. The same word he desecrated with every dollar he laundered through fake invoices and shell companies. I folded the note, placed it in my evidence folder, and didn't respond. If Calvin wanted to talk legacy, he could do it from the witness stand. Teens. Carolina's final words that night lingered with me. Elaine, the next step is exposure. But once we cross that line, it's war. I poured myself a glass of wine, looked out at the lights blinking across the Hudson, and answered, then let's sharpen our swords. Because you don't bring a white flag to a battlefield you didn't start. The war began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A whisper slipped into inboxes and newsrooms across the city. A press packet anonymous in name but undeniable in detail. Spreadsheets, timelines, photos, and most damning of all, screenshots of internal emails Piper never expected anyone outside the circle to see. Just reroute it through Horizon PR and mark it under wellness branding. That little line buried in a thread about a $72,000 invoice paid by the foundation was the match that lit everything. Carolina sent me the link at 6:43 a.m. Check the times, her message said. You're going to want tea for this. I opened the article. Charity or cover, Wilson Family Foundation. Faces scrutiny after anonymous leak reveals lavish expenditures. Beneath the headline, a glossy photo of Piper taken during her last panel on ethical women in wealth. The irony could have crushed steel. I sat there in my robe, the city still dark outside, and just breathed. We were past the point of no return now, and it felt good. By 9:00 a.m., the story had spread to 3 other outlets. The words embezzlement, IRS audit, and potential prosecution were all over the screen. I received 3 calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and 1 voicemail from Piper that started with Mother, if you're doing what I think you're doing, and ended with a disconnected tone. I didn't call her back. Instead, I lit a candle, made toast with too much butter, and flipped open my notebook. Today's to-do list was written in thick, steady lines. Finalized statement with Carolina. Schedule Luke's sit-down interview. Print binder copies of evidence for SEC review. Frame the New York Times article. A bit petty. Perhaps. Still satisfying. By lunchtime, the internet had taken sides. Reddit threads swelled with amateur sleuths mapping financial timelines. Twitter, X lit up with takes like Rich. People always show you who they are eventually. And my personal favorite old money grandma goes full John Wick. Luke texted me from campus. Grandma, you're a meme. They edited you into the Game of Thrones throne room holding a ledger. I smiled into my soup. 3 months ago, they were pretending I didn't exist. Now I was a force. But as public noise rose, private maneuvering intensified. That afternoon, a manila envelope was slipped under my door. No return address again. Inside a check, 7 figures, blank endorsement line, and a post-it with 3 words, "Let's end this." I took a photo, sent it to Carolina, and said, "Add it to the folder." She replied instantly, "Do you want to press charges?" I looked at the check, crisp and meaningless. "No," I typed, "I want the truth. And if that hurts, so be it." That night, I sat on my terrace with a soft blanket over my knees and my favorite mug filled with sleepy time tea. I opened the audio recorder on my phone and started talking not to the courts, not to the media, but to Luke. "Sweetheart," I said, "if you're hearing this one day without me in the room, I want you to know something." I paused. The wind made the leaves chatter like old women gossiping on a porch. "You saved me. With your faith, with your questions, with that sly, lopsided grin that tells me when you're lying about your homework." I sipped my tea. I was ready to fade. They wanted me to. The world has a funny way of telling women like me when it's time to disappear. But not you. You looked me in the eye and asked me what I was going to do about it. Another pause. I did this because no one else was going to protect what I built. And maybe one day, you'll have something worth protecting too. When that day comes, I hope you remember that quiet power can be louder than any shout, and truth always leaves a longer shadow than a lie. I ended the recording, saved it under the name For Luke in Case. The next day, the subpoenas began. 3, then 7, then a full 12. Requests for records, digital files, testimony. The Department of Justice was officially engaged. And Calvin, well, he was on the news. In a gray suit that didn't fit, and a voice trembling just enough to make him seem concerned. He said, "These accusations are heartbreaking. My mother has always been dramatic, and we fear she may be under the influence of outside advisors." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my spoon. Dramatic. You fake invoices for wellness retreats and call me dramatic. Please. That evening, I met Luke outside Columbia. He looked at me for a long moment. "You okay?" I nodded. Truth has a weight to it. We walked no destination in mind, just city blocks and shadows passing us like quiet ghosts. "I always wondered," he said, "if you ever regretted building the company, if all the sacrifices were worth it." I stopped at a crosswalk, looked at the lit-up window of a bakery across the street, and answered honestly, "I don't regret building it. I regret who I trusted with it." He didn't speak, just squeezed my hand. After a moment, I added, "But I don't regret this fight, not 1 second of it." Luke looked at me with that soft determination he's always had. "Then keep going, Grandma, because we're just getting started." And right then, with taxis whooshing past and the whole city spinning on its own chaotic axis, I knew this war was going to end on my terms. The phone call that came the next morning wasn't from an attorney or a reporter. It was from my sister, Jolene. We hadn't spoken in years, maybe more. But there she was, her name flashing on the screen like a ghost who decided now was the time to reappear. I hesitated before answering. Then I took a deep breath and pressed the green button. "You sure picked a loud way to get the family's attention," she said by way of hello. I chuckled. "Well, I figured if I'm going to burn bridges, I might as well do it with fireworks." She laughed soft and raspy, like she'd been waiting years to let it out. "I saw your face on the news," she said. "You look strong." That made me pause, because I didn't feel strong, I felt tired. Righteous, yes, but the kind of tired that settles in your bones when you've been holding your breath for too long. Still, I told her thank you. Jolene and I hadn't always been distant. In our 20s, we'd been a matched set. But life has a way of wedging silence between people, even the ones you love, especially the ones you love. I always wondered what you saw in Calvin, she said after a beat. He was slippery, even as a kid. I stirred my tea and leaned against the windowsill. I saw my son, and I didn't want to believe he could be anything but good. That's the trouble with being a mother, she said. You spend half your life teaching them to be good and the other half pretending they still are. We stayed on the line for a while, the kind of silence that feels more like companionship than distance. When we hung up, I realized I'd been smiling. Dad, the DOJ's pace turned relentless. Piper predictably disappeared from the public eye, no more panel talks or authentic family Instagram stories. Calvin, on the other hand, doubled down. He made an official statement through his lawyer. My mother is emotionally unstable and being manipulated by individuals with their own agendas. We are concerned for her well-being. Oh, how generous of him, a concerned son. I printed the statement and tacked it to my fridge. Motivation, darling. Like a post-it on a bathroom mirror that says, "You got this." Also, he's lying. Meanwhile, Carolina was orchestrating every move like a maestro conducting a legal symphony. She filed motions, coordinated interviews, and drafted the public-facing documents so clean and airtight even seasoned reporters struggled to poke holes. We knew this was headed for court, but I had one final move before the spotlight shifted indoors. It was Luke's idea, actually. We were in my living room working through a binder of documentation when he looked up and said, "What if you talk to the camera? Like a press conference?" "No. More personal, you telling your story, your words, your timing. No edits." I raised an eyebrow. "You think people would listen?" He handed me his phone. There on TikTok, of all places, was a video of me walking into the audit hearing, slow motion, dramatic music, thousands of likes. "You're already a symbol, Grandma. Might as well speak for yourself." So I did. We set up his little tripod, angled the lighting just right, and I sat in my favorite chair, the velvet blue one I bought on a whim after my first big contract was signed. I looked into the lens, smoothed the front of my blouse, and spoke. "My name is Meredith Ellis. I'm 68 years old. And for the last 3 years, I've watched my legacy, what I spent a lifetime building, get stolen piece by people I once trusted. No script, no notes, just truth. I talked about the family dinners that slowly stopped the bank statements that didn't add up the moment I realized I'd been erased from my own story. I didn't go public to shame anyone, I said. I went public because silence protects the guilty, and I'm done being quiet. I ended it simply. If you've ever been made to feel invisible, I see you. And I promise, it's never too late to take your voice back. We uploaded it and waited. Within 12 hours, it had 1.8 million views. Public opinion began to shift with momentum. News outlets pivoted their tone from scandal chasing to legacy respecting. Commentators who once questioned my sanity now called me a symbol of generational accountability. And the part that struck me the most, letters, dozens of them, from other women, a retired teacher from Boise, a nurse from Atlanta, a librarian in Denver, all telling me their own stories of being pushed out, cut off, dismissed by people they loved. "I thought I was alone," one woman wrote. "Then I saw you standing there in court and I cried. Because if you could fight back, maybe I can too." I cried too reading that, because that was the part no one talks about. The power of just being seen. 2 nights later, the first big break in the investigation came. The foundation's former accountant, one Piper, had fired abruptly last spring, agreed to testify. Carolina got the call while we were reviewing deposition questions. "She's flipping," she said, "immunity in exchange for full disclosure." I closed my eyes and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Then we're really doing this," I whispered. Carolina's voice softened. "You've already done it, Meredith. This is just the closing act. And oh, how sweet the ending would be." The courthouse in Charleston hadn't changed much since the last time I'd stepped foot inside. Same worn floors, same faint smell of old wood and paper files. Except this time, I wasn't there to renew a business license or testify about zoning. I was there for war. The state versus Calvin Ellis and Piper Dane. Fraud, embezzlement, financial abuse, and the one that stung the most exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Me. I wore the pearl earrings my mother gave me when I turned 50. Back then, they were a symbol of reaching a certain age. Now they were armor. Each small shimmer on my ears said I'm still here, still sharp, still standing. Carolina sat beside me, flipping through the binder of statements like it was just another Thursday. Luke sat behind us in the gallery, posture stiff but eyes alert. I could tell he was scared, but I wasn't. Not anymore. Because the truth was heavier than fear. It outweighed it. The prosecution opened clean and direct. They laid out the paper trail of the Ellis Family Foundation's missing funds cross-referenced accounts tied to Piper's luxury purchases and showed the cascading lies Calvin told to lock me out of my own assets. And it wasn't just about me. They presented a string of testimonies from ex-employees who'd been let go while the Ellis mansion added a new saltwater pool. They stole from the company she built, the attorney said, motioning toward me. They drained money meant for scholarships and hospital donations, and they did it while convincing her she was losing her mind. At one point, Piper's attorney objected. Irrelevant character assessment. The judge, an older woman with a gaze sharp enough to cut granite, simply raised an eyebrow. Sustained, but barely. Let's move along. I could have kissed her. When it was my turn to take the stand, I walked slowly, letting every footstep remind me where I'd come from, what I'd survived. The courtroom was still, every eye on me. State your name, the prosecutor prompted. Meredith Ruth Ellis, and your relation to the defendants. My son and his wife. I said it without a tremble. I'd practiced it 1,000 times in my mind like a mantra. My son and his wife. We started at the beginning, my founding of Ellis & Sloan Publishing in 1983, the sacrifices it took the nights sleeping on the office couch while raising a toddler. I described how Calvin came on board at 25 full of ideas and ambition, how I trusted him, how I slowly stepped back, not because I was incapable, but because I thought I was making space for him to shine. I didn't retire, I said, looking at the jury. I was removed, carefully, strategically, by people who claimed they were protecting me. I saw Calvin flinch slightly, just a twitch, but it was there. I told them about the document I'd signed under stress, without legal representation, transferring power of attorney, the financial decisions made in my name, the accounts drained, the house sold without my knowledge. And then I said what needed saying. They made me believe I was forgetful, I said, eyes scanning the jury. Not because I was, but because it made their betrayal easier to execute. One juror, a young woman with a braid down her back, blinked hard like she was holding back tears. I didn't cry. I didn't crack. Because this was my moment and I wasn't giving it away. After I stepped down, Carolina whispered, "You just gave them their verdict." The defense went predictably. They painted me as confused, emotional, erratic. A woman mourning her husband and projecting her grief onto her son. They even brought in a psychologist, one hired by Piper conveniently to suggest I'd shown signs of mild disorientation during routine business meetings. Carolina eviscerated him on cross-examination. "You've never spoken to Mrs. Ellis, directly correct." "No, I based my analysis on third-party notes and phone calls." "So just to clarify for the jury, you diagnosed a woman you've never met using hearsay." He stammered. Carolina smiled. "Calvin never testified." Piper did briefly. She looked tired, her sharp edges dulled by stress, but her tone remained polished, controlled. "I never intended harm," she said. "We thought Meredith needed support. Support in the form of forged wire transfers and first-class flights to Capri. Interesting form of caregiving." "Nah." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I spent that time in a waiting room with Luke and Carolina flipping through a gardening magazine without absorbing a single word. "I'm not nervous," I told them. What's the word?" Luke said, anticipatory. "That's the one. Like waiting for thunder after the lightning hits." And then the verdict came. Guilty, on all major counts. My heart didn't leap. My fists didn't raise in triumph. Instead, I felt a quiet sort of peace wash over me like the air after a storm. We exited through the back to avoid press, but Carolina handed me a printout of the court's decision anyway. "For the record," she said. I slid it into my purse right next to the old family photo I carried, but never looked at anymore. That night, Luke cooked dinner in my apartment. Grilled salmon, roasted potatoes, too much garlic, just the way I liked it. He raised his glass. To victory. I clinked his glass. To truth. And then after a moment, to starting over. Because that's the part they never show you on courtroom dramas. That once the gavel drops, you still have to go home. You still have to wake up the next morning and ask yourself, what now? And the truth is, I didn't know yet. But I knew this: I was free. Free of lies. Free of guilt. Free to rebuild without permission. And that, darling, was more than enough. The morning after the verdict, I woke up before sunrise. The sky over Charleston was still the color of Riverstone, with just the faintest touch of light seeping in around the edges. I wrapped myself in the old cotton robe Richard gave me on our 30th anniversary, frayed at the cuffs but softer than anything new, and padded into the kitchen for tea. Something about quiet after chaos, Bami, it's not peace exactly. It's more like the ringing in your ears after the music stops. Your body still expects noise even though everything's finally still. I sat at the window with my mug and just breathed. Freedom is a funny thing. You think you'll feel light, like you've been unshackled, but sometimes it feels heavier than anything that came before. Because now you have to figure out what to do with all that wide open space. Carolina called around 10. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone cut the ropes off a hot air balloon," I said. "Except I'm not sure where I'm floating yet." She laughed gently. "Float a bit, you've earned it." And she was right. For the first time in over 3 years, I didn't have to calculate, defend, hide, or gather proof. I didn't have to reread old emails or wonder who was lying to me. That alone was worth celebrating. Still, part of me felt restless. I couldn't just exist in the aftermath. That's not who I am. That's when Luke showed up unannounced, as he often did now. He had a brown paper bag from the bakery around the corner, croissants still warm, and a gleam in his eye that I hadn't seen in weeks. "Got something to show you," he said, mouth half full of pastry. He pulled out a slim black laptop and opened a document. "It's a draft proposal for something I've been thinking about." I leaned in. At the top of the page, bold letters read, "The Ruth Initiative, a foundation for ethical family business reform." He looked at me nervous. "I know the name's bold, but I figured—" "It's perfect," I said. The proposal outlined a nonprofit dedicated to helping families navigate business succession without falling into the traps we did. Legal support, financial transparency tools, conflict mediation, a nationwide hotline for whistleblowers and caretakers who feel cornered. "Most people don't know they're being manipulated until it's too late," Luke said. "You didn't. And what happened to you, it happens more than people admit." He was right. According to one study I'd read, over 60% of financial exploitation cases among older adults are committed by someone they know. Most never report it, because it's family. Because shame is a powerful silencer. "They'll listen to you, Grandma," Luke added softly. "You're proof it's survivable." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You're damn right they will." Yeah. We spent the rest of the day outlining logistics, legal structures, hiring a small advisory board, building a website. I'd been called a lot of things over the years: CEO, mother, widow, victim, but founder again. That label lit something in me I thought had burned out. By the time the sun set, the name Ruth felt less like a brand and more like a rebirth. 2 weeks later, we launched a soft version of the Ruth Initiative's website. Just a few pages, a mission statement, a contact form, a list of common red flags in family-run businesses. And within 72 hours, we had over 100 messages. One was from a woman in Minnesota whose sister was slowly funneling funds from their parents' joint account. Another from a man in Oregon who realized his adult children had been forging his signature on refinancing paperwork. But the one that stopped me cold came from Alabama. "My name is Trudy," it read. "I'm 74. My son moved me into a facility and told the staff I was paranoid and forgetful. He said I was no longer safe at home. He took my house, sold my car, and now my mail gets redirected to him. I don't have access to anything, not even my own bank statements. But I'm not crazy. Please, help me. I read it aloud to Luke, my hands trembling slightly. This, I whispered. This is why we do it. We reached out the next day. By week's end, our pro bono attorney had filed a motion to regain control of her estate. Trudy sent me a handwritten letter after it was approved. It just said, "Thank you for reminding me I still exist." That night I cried. Not because I was sad, but because something inside me finally cracked open and let the light in. This was my purpose now. Not just retribution, but resurrection. Not just proving Calvin and Piper wrong, but proving every silenced person right. The irony. Word got around fast. News outlets that once covered the trial now wanted to profile me. Not as the victim, but as the founder of a movement. Carolina coordinated interviews. Luke handled logistics. And I found myself back on camera, same Pearl's new mission. In one interview, the host asked me, "What would you say to someone who's being quietly pushed out by their family?" I looked straight into the lens and said, "Your gut isn't broken. Trust it. And if they say you're crazy, ask for receipts." It went viral overnight. Apparently, people still listen when a grandmother speaks plainly. That week, I updated my will again. Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't. I left 80% of my remaining assets to the Ruth Initiative. The rest, Luke, and a few scholarships for young women pursuing ethics in business. As for Calvin and Piper, they were serving time now. 5 years each. Not nearly enough, but long enough for the world to forget them and remember me. I still got the occasional letter. Rambling apologies, explanations wrapped in manipulation. I didn't open them anymore. I just tossed them in a drawer I labeled unsent invitations to closure. Some stories don't need final words, just better beginnings. And mine, it was only just getting started. The first snow came early that year. Charleston doesn't usually get much, but that December, a hush fell over the city like the sky had decided we all needed a soft reset. Luke and I watched it drift down from my balcony, him with hot cocoa, me with my tea, both wrapped in mismatched blankets like we were hibernating bears who'd just discovered how to use streaming apps. We were still catching our breath from the whirlwind the Ruth Initiative had become. 3 weeks and we already had partnerships forming with legal clinics, community centers, and even a few independent financial firms who wanted to sponsor elder justice workshops. It was surreal, but it wasn't fantasy. It was happening. And then came the call. Aaron, my old lawyer, the one who'd helped me vanish from that miserable care facility all those months ago, his voice was calm but clipped. "Ruth, someone filed a petition in probate court. They're trying to contest your updated will." I blinked, setting down my mug. "Who?" "Take a guess." I didn't need to. The name scrolled across my mind like the end credits of a bad movie, Piper and Calvin's 2 grown sons. My grandsons, technically. Names I hadn't spoken aloud in over a year. We hadn't talked since the trial. I hadn't heard from them, not even a birthday card. They were as silent as stone until now. What grounds are they using? Aaron sighed. "They claim you're being unduly influenced, that Luke has manipulated you into disinheriting them. They've also included the Ruth Initiative in their list of suspicious beneficiaries." I let out a low, slow laugh. "So they're accusing me of being influenced by starting a nonprofit that rescues victims of people like them, essentially." I stood my spine straightening with that old familiar heat. "Then let's go remind the court exactly who they're dealing with." The hearing was held in a quiet courthouse on the south side of Charleston. Nothing grand, just beige walls, tired ceiling fans, and those stiff, pew-like benches that always smell faintly of lemon cleaner and nerves. I walked in wearing a charcoal gray coat, soft leather gloves, and the same pair of low-heeled shoes I'd worn the day I testified against Calvin. I wasn't there to beg. I was there to confirm. The judge, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense stare, nodded as we entered. Luke stood beside me, quiet, calm, composed. His presence alone was more powerful than any speech I could give. Across the aisle sat Aaron and my grandsons Matthew and Spencer. It had been nearly a decade since I'd seen them up close. Spencer, the younger one, shifted uncomfortably, clearly, not thrilled to be there. Matthew, though. His gaze met mine, unblinking. That same cool entitlement I'd seen so many times in his father's eyes. A man who thought proximity to family name entitled him to the crown. They didn't greet me, just nodded curtly like this was a negotiation instead of an insult. The judge began. This petition challenges the validity of Ms. Ruth Langford's revised will on the basis of undue influence and cognitive decline. Petitioners allege that Ms. Langford's mental state may have rendered her vulnerable to coercion by one Lucas Langford. Ms. Langford, do you have a response? I stood. Your Honor, I began, voice steady. My grandsons have not visited me in nearly 5 years. Not once during my legal battles with their father and stepmother. Not during the hearings. Not even during the sentencing. I have no calls, no cards, no concern, not a whisper of contact, until they learned I'd redirected my estate to people who actually believe in something. A pause. The courtroom hung still as icicles. I may be 68 years old, I continued, but I have my full faculties. I am not confused. I am not coerced. I am not the weak old woman they're hoping I am. Then I gestured toward Luke. This young man has been my confidant, my caretaker, my partner in rebuilding everything Calvin tried to destroy. He didn't ask me for anything. He didn't even want anything except for the truth to matter, which is more than I can say for the people trying to profit from my obituary before I've even finished my coffee. I heard a chuckle from somewhere in the back, probably one of the clerks. Aaron stood next. Your Honor, we've submitted medical records confirming Ms. Langford's complete cognitive competency, including independent evaluations performed during her prior court proceedings. We've also submitted documentation tracing the origins and intent of the Ruth Initiative, an organization Ms. Langford founded and funds personally. He turned to Matthew and Spencer. Petitioners have offered no proof beyond speculation. No contact, no care, no concern. They didn't question her mental state when they thought they were inheriting millions. Only now, when she's chosen a different legacy, have they decided to pretend she's incapable. The judge nodded slowly. I've reviewed the evidence, she said. There's no basis for this petition. It's not only denied, it's dismissed with prejudice. Ms. Langford, your will stands. And just like that, it was over. Matthew looked like someone had slapped him with a dictionary. Spencer looked relieved, if anything. Luke squeezed my hand as we left the courtroom. You okay? I smiled faintly. Better than okay. Because the truth was that hearing wasn't about them. It was about me. Standing up again when someone tried to silence me. Drawing the line again when others tried to cross it. Claiming again what was always mine, the right to decide my own story. That night, we celebrated with grilled cheese and tomato soup. Nothing fancy. Just good food, warm lights, and the kind of laughter that comes when you realize you're finally safe. I think you need a new nickname, Luke said between bites. Ruth the Unshakable. I chuckled. That sounds like a ship. Exactly. One that sails right through storms. And as the snow fell softly outside and the fireplace cracked in its quiet, rhythmic way, I realized that's exactly what I'd become. 2 days after the court hearing, I received an envelope in the mail. Thick paper, gold trim, my name written in calligraphy. For half a second, I thought it was another summons or a formal complaint. But when I slid it open, a delicate card inside read, Ruth Langford, you are cordially invited to be the keynote speaker at the National Elder Justice Symposium. I blinked. There it was. Not just validation from a courtroom, but recognition from a national platform. They want me to speak, I murmured aloud, rereading the card like it might disappear. Luke looked up from the breakfast table. You? The woman who started a national initiative and single-handedly took down a family crime ring? Yeah, I'd say you're qualified. I rolled my eyes, but I'll admit I grinned. The conference was scheduled for April in Denver. They even offered to fly me first class and cover accommodations, which I turned down politely. If we're fighting elder abuse, I told them we don't waste donor money on luxury fluff. Instead, I used the budget to bring 3 women from the Ruth Initiative, along women who had survived coercion, financial control, and family manipulation. Each of them had stories like mine, only without the protection or the platform. I wanted the world to hear them too. The morning of the speech, the hotel ballroom buzzed with polite clinks of teacups and the rustle of programs. Hundreds of chairs filled with attorneys, policymakers, social workers, and survivors, all looking up at the stage like it held some kind of map to safety. I walked up to the podium slowly, my knees stiff with age, but my spine unbending. I wore a navy blue pantsuit, tailored, modest, quietly powerful. Around my neck, I wore a necklace made from clay beads, a gift from one of the Ruth Initiative's first clients. "Good morning," I said, letting the mic catch the tremble in my breath. "I'm Ruth Langford, and I used to think dignity was something other people could take from you." A hush settled. I used to think that when someone put you in a nursing home against your will, or took your name off your own bank account, or told the world you were confused, that somehow their opinion became the truth. I scanned the room, locking eyes with several women near the front row, but I learned something else. I learned that silence is a choice, that dignity isn't what they can take, it's what you decide to hold on to. Even if your hands are shaking, even if your voice cracks. A long pause. I let the quiet stretch. I was betrayed by my own son. Not just abandoned, not just lied to betrayed. And for a long time, I thought the shame was mine to carry. But it wasn't. The shame belonged to him. I took a deep breath. And when I finally stopped making excuses, when I finally stood up, tired, heartbroken, scared, but still standing, that's when I found out I wasn't alone. Soft applause began, hesitant at first, then building. Now I'm standing here not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a reminder that no matter how old you are, no matter how invisible you've been made to feel, your story still matters. And if you speak it, others will find their courage too. I paused to let that settle. And if you're lucky, I added with a twinkle in my eye, you'll get to torch a few legal documents along the way. The laughter was unexpected and beautiful. After the speech, a line formed. People, so many of them older women, hugged me, cried, whispered thank yous, told me stories that mirrored my own with eerie accuracy. Sons, daughters, cousins, caregivers who crossed lines and hid behind legal power, but also stories of resistance, of wills rewritten, of stolen accounts recovered, of names restored. "You gave us the language to fight back," one woman whispered, gripping my hands with weathered fingers. "You gave us a name for what they did." Luke stood nearby, quiet but proud. Later, as we rode the elevator back up to our floor, he turned to me. "You're not just helping people survive Grandma. You're helping them rewrite their endings." And I felt that truth settle deep. The next few weeks brought ripple after ripple. The Ruth Initiative's website traffic exploded. We had to hire 2 new staff members just to handle the intake forms. Universities asked to use our training modules. Courts started citing our literature during conservatorship hearings. And then came the one thing I hadn't expected. A letter from a return address in Kentucky. I knew the handwriting before I opened it. Calvin's. I read it slowly, sitting at the kitchen table with the soft whir of the ceiling fan above me. "Ruth," it began, "I heard about the foundation, about the speech. I guess you finally got your moment." I wanted to say that I never meant for things to go the way they did. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was helping. I know you won't believe me. And maybe you shouldn't. But if there's a chance you ever look back and remember anything about us, remember that I loved you. Even if I was terrible at it." That was all. No apology, no acknowledgement of the damage, just sentiment. I folded the letter and placed it in the bottom drawer of my writing desk. Not to treasure, but to remember. Because sometimes the people who break us the most are the ones we once called home. And healing doesn't always require confrontation. Sometimes it just requires that we stop carrying their story inside our own. But that night, I sat on the porch wrapped in an old quilt, listening to the cicadas hum in the trees. Luke joined me with his laptop, typing something for one of his business ethics classes. "Do you ever miss them?" he asked gently. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I miss the version of them I believed in," I said, "but not the reality, and certainly not the silence they expected me to live with." He nodded. "They underestimated you." "People always do," I said, sipping my tea, "especially when you're quiet. But silence doesn't mean surrender. It just means we're listening and taking notes." A pause. "And if we're lucky," I added with a tired grin, "we get to read them aloud." A few days after I spoke at the symposium, something unexpected landed in my inbox, a request from a young producer at PBS. "We'd like to create a short documentary about your story," she wrote. "Not just the legal part, but the emotional part. What it feels like to be erased, and what it takes to reclaim yourself." That last line stayed with me. What it takes to reclaim yourself. I stared at the message for a long time. In the past, I might have hesitated, worried about appearances or judgment, but those days were behind me. I wrote back, "Yes, let's tell the truth." Yeah. The crew arrived 2 weeks later. They were young, soft-spoken, gentle with the equipment, and even gentler with me. They filmed me sitting in my favorite armchair, surrounded by shelves of old books and soft lamplight, a cat curled up at my feet. They asked me about Calvin, about the senior facility, about the phone being taken, the cold sheets, the taste of silence. And I told them everything. But I also told them about the girl I used to be, the one who worked 3 jobs in her 20s to buy her first duplex, the woman who painted the nursery herself at 7 months pregnant, the mother who made cinnamon rolls from scratch every Sunday morning, no matter how tired she was. I needed them to know that I wasn't just a victim. I was a full human being, long before someone decided I was inconvenient. That's something they don't always understand, especially when you're older. They flatten you down to one bad moment, one bad relationship, one tragedy. But people like me, we've lived lifetimes. Entire novels tucked into wrinkles and stretch marks and silver hair, and we deserve to be seen that way. They nodded quietly, the sound guy wiping his eyes more than once. After the final take, the producer handed me a thumb drive, just in case she said you ever want to watch it alone on a quiet day. I thanked her, but I haven't watched it yet. Some stories are easier to live than to relive. Nah. Meanwhile, the Ruth Initiative kept growing. We hired our first full-time legal liaison, Sylvia, a former social worker turned fierce advocate. We created a hotline available 24/7 for seniors experiencing coercion or financial abuse. Calls came in from all over Idaho, Michigan, even Canada, and every story was a reminder that this wasn't just my battle. It was everywhere. We launched a podcast, Still Hear Stories of Survival at Every Age. I hosted the first 5 episodes, my voice softer than it used to be, but stronger somehow. I interviewed women in their 80s who'd escaped abusive marriages, men who had been manipulated out of their homes, and even a 92-year-old jazz musician who'd signed away his music rights to a grandson in exchange for a television. "You gotta read the fine print, baby," he said with a grin, "even when it's written by family." That episode got the most downloads. Then one night in late spring, I received a voicemail from someone I never expected. His voice was gravelly slower than I remembered, but I knew it instantly. "Ruth, it's Calvin." I stared at the phone like it might disappear. "I know I have no right to call you. I know that. I saw you on the news. And I guess I wanted to say, I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry. For all of it. For what I took from you and what I never gave." There was a long pause. "If you ever want to talk, I'm in Dayton still. Same number." That was it. No demands, no guilt, just a man at the end of a long road looking back. I didn't call him back, at least not right away, but I didn't delete the message either. Instead, I went out to the backyard. The air was thick with honeysuckle and cut grass. Fireflies floated like tiny lanterns over the garden, and I thought about forgiveness. Not the shiny kind that looks good in memoirs, the real kind. The gritty, uneven, hard-earned kind that comes with no guarantee of closure. I wasn't there yet, but maybe someday. Forgiveness, after all, isn't something you give for them. It's something you give to yourself when the weight gets too heavy to carry. And that night, I felt a little lighter. The next morning, Luke came by with bagels and a newspaper folded under his arm. "You're in it again," he said, grinning. "The Times. full-page feature on elder rights. He handed me the article, and sure enough, there was my name beneath the headline, "The Woman Who Refused to Be Forgotten." I skimmed it, catching phrases like pioneering advocate, grassroots revolution, and a new model for elder care justice. But the line that caught me most was buried near the end. She didn't just take down those who tried to silence her. She created a megaphone for those who'd never been heard. I set the paper down and looked out the window where a sparrow perched on the fence singing like it owned the sky. Maybe it did. Maybe we all do once we stop waiting for permission. Luke poured me coffee and we sat in comfortable silence. "You okay?" he asked eventually. I smiled. "I'm better than okay, I'm free." And I meant it. Not the kind of freedom you put in a mission statement. The kind that settles in your bones when you've survived the fire, when you faced the mirror and still said, "I'm here." No edits, no apologies. Just here. Still, the weeks after the article came out were a blur of requests. Speaking engagements, panel invitations, letters from strangers. Some were simple thank you notes handwritten in careful cursive. Some were desperate cries for help, stories so familiar it made my chest ache. A woman in Nebraska whose son had tricked her into signing over her property. A retired teacher in Florida whose daughter claimed her Social Security checks in exchange for keeping her company. A man in Oregon whose niece changed his insurance plan without his consent. They all ended the same, "I didn't know who to turn to until I found you." I read every letter, responded to every email, because I remembered how it felt to be discarded, to sit in a beige room with no phone and no voice, to be spoken over, spoken for never spoken to. One afternoon, I received a visit from someone who had no idea the part he'd played in my awakening. His name was Thomas, used to work at Willow Grove, maintenance crew. He knocked on my door, gently cap in hand, and smiled as I opened it. "Ms. Whitmore," he said with a nervous shift of his weight, "you probably don't remember me." "I remember everyone who didn't treat me like furniture," I said, smiling. "Come in." We sat on the back porch, iced tea between us, the sun warming the old wood beneath our feet. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said, clearing his throat. "I saw how they handled things back then, knew something wasn't right. I should have spoken up." I looked at him carefully. "Why didn't you?" He rubbed his hands together. "Because I didn't think anyone would listen. And because I was scared." "Job's a job, you know." "I do," I nodded. "But then you left," he said, eyes meeting mine. "And now there's a whole hotline named after you. So I guess you proved me wrong." I laughed. "I've been wrong about people too. It's the leaving that teaches you." He blinked. "Teaches you what?" "That silence is a choice." He stayed for another 10 minutes before heading out, but not before slipping a small donation envelope into my mailbox on his way down the walk. The note read, "For the next person who needs to get out." Meanwhile, the calls from producers kept coming. Some wanted reality shows. One woman pitched a fictional drama loosely based on my life, something about a glamorous widow turned vigilante. "I don't wear red lipstick and heels," I told her. "I wear orthopedic shoes and carry receipts." She didn't call back. But one offer caught my attention. A public broadcasting series, Serious, Elegant, Real. They wanted to create a segment called Silent Strength, featuring survivors of elder abuse telling their own stories. I agreed on one condition: no script. If we were going to speak, it had to be raw, unvarnished. The cameras rolled in my living room 2 weeks later. No makeup crew, no filtered lighting, just me and my truth. They asked what it felt like the moment I realized Calvin had taken everything. I answered without flinching, like I'd just been erased in real time. But also, like I was waking up. Like the fog was finally lifting and I could see clearly for the first time in years. The segment aired that Sunday. PBS stations around the country played it. Emails flooded in again, some angry, most grateful. One said simply, "You've said what I've been too scared to say." That same week, the Ruth Initiative opened its second office. We held the ribbon-cutting ceremony at a community center on the west side of Dayton. The room was small but packed. Luke gave the opening remarks. "This is for everyone who's ever been told they're too old, too confused, too difficult," he said. "My grandmother taught me that age doesn't mean silence. It means you've earned the right to be heard." The crowd clapped. Someone in the back shouted amen. I took the mic next, my hand trembling slightly. I wasn't always brave, I told them. Sometimes I cried in the dark. Sometimes I doubted myself. But every single time I wanted to give up, I remembered one thing: I still had a voice. I paused, watching the crowd. And if I still had a voice, I still had power. After the ceremony, a woman approached me. She looked to be in her 70s, smartly dressed, lipstick just slightly outside the lines. "My name's Marlene," she said. "My son put me in a home 2 years ago, told me it was temporary, that he'd come back for me." I waited. He never did. She handed me a small notebook. I wrote everything down. Every missed call, every lie, every name of every nurse who looked the other way. I looked down at her shaking hands. "You did the hard part already," I said softly. "You remembered. Now we'll help you be heard." She cried then. Not loud, not messy, just a quiet release like air escaping a balloon that's been held too tight for too long. Sometimes people don't need rescue. They just need someone to believe them. Back at home that night, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea and watched the streetlights flicker on. A cat wandered by and stopped at the edge of my steps. Not mine, just curious. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. "You look like you've seen a few storms." The cat blinked slowly, then laid down as if to say, "Me too." We sat together like that two survivors under the early stars, saying nothing at all. And in that silence, I felt a kind of peace that doesn't come from winning. It comes from knowing that win or lose, you showed up for yourself, that you didn't disappear, that you stayed visible, even when they tried to turn the lights off. The trial began on a Wednesday morning, so cold even the courthouse steps seemed to shiver. I arrived with my scarf wrapped high, the same one Ruth had knitted me back in '95, the year after she beat cancer. Her strength always lived in the stitches. I figured I'd need a bit of that today. Inside the courtroom was sterile and bright, like it was trying to scrub away the darkness it had invited in. But you can't bleach betrayal. Calvin sat at the defense table, flanked by 2 lawyers with expensive shoes and tired eyes. He looked smaller than I remembered. His suit too big, his face drawn the same nervous smile I'd once seen when he lied about wrecking the car at 16. But this wasn't teenage recklessness. This was a man who'd stolen identities, forged documents, siphoned money from trust accounts, and gaslit the woman who raised him into doubting her own mind. And I was here to testify. Chat. The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Carla Parks, walked me through my statement gently, like she knew I'd bled to get here. "Mrs. Whitmore," she asked, "when did you first suspect your son was misusing your financial accounts?" I didn't hesitate. When I asked for my phone and the nurse said my son had it shut off. That's when I realized he didn't want to care for me. He wanted me quiet. The jury leaned forward, every eye on me. I met each one in turn. I wanted them to see me, not as a victim, but as someone who had survived. A quirky fact: the average juror retains only about 30% of testimony from memory. But emotional testimony, that sticks like gum on a summer sidewalk. I made sure they felt what I'd felt. The silence, the disbelief, the heartbreak of betrayal dressed up as concern. I described the fake signatures, the missing money, the forged loan documents that had my late husband's name on them, signed 2 years after he died. "I don't need pity," I told them, my voice steady. "I just want my name back." Calvin's lawyer tried to discredit me, of course. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, flipping through a stack of papers. "Is it possible you're confused about the dates on these documents?" I smiled just slightly. Only if I was confused when I kept every tax return since 1984 in labeled folders in my closet. "Shall I recite your next question too, because I read your defense brief last night?" He blinked. "Next question," he muttered. "Old age doesn't mean ignorance. It means you've had decades to learn how to read people faster than they can prepare a sentence." By the second day, Calvin's mask had cracked. When the prosecution displayed the photos of him and Elise on their luxury trip to Cabo, funded by a withdrawal from the nonprofit account named after Ruth, he visibly winced. She would have hated that I whispered not to the courtroom, just to myself. It's one thing to steal. It's another to dishonor the dead to do it. Jan, there was a debate during a recess that made its way from the courtroom to the sidewalk. Should family ever press charges on family? Someone asked near the vending machines. An older gentleman responded, blood doesn't excuse theft. If it did, the mafia would be legal. People chuckled, but I didn't, because I'd asked myself that same question for months. And every time I looked at my grandson's face, every time I thought of the nurses he'd manipulated or the charities he'd stolen from, the answer stayed the same. Yes. If it protects others, yes. The final witness was the forensic accountant Eleanor had hired. He laid out everything with surgical precision. Timelines, transfers, offshore wires, fake invoices. It was so detailed, even Calvin's lawyers looked like they were learning about some of it for the first time. When he was done, the prosecutor turned to the jury. You've seen the paper trail. You've heard the stories. The evidence isn't complicated, it's calculated. And the defendant counted on one thing, that no one would listen to an old woman. Today, let's prove him wrong. Mic, drop. The deliberation lasted 5 hours. I spent the time in a nearby park feeding birds with stale crackers and watching clouds drift overhead like lazy parade floats. Funny how the world doesn't stop just because yours is on trial. When the call came in, I returned to the courthouse with Eleanor on one side and Luke on the other. Calvin stood as the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the floor, like maybe, if he didn't move, he'd disappear into it. But disappearing is my trick, sweetheart. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. 10 years with eligibility for parole in 6. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even closure. It was accountability. He'd have to wake up every morning and look in the mirror, knowing the world knew the truth. And so would I. Tim. Afterward, Luke asked if I wanted to go for ice cream. We did. 2 scoops of butter pecans sitting on a weathered bench near the river. Grandma, he said, eyes soft. Do you feel better now? I considered that. No, I said, but I feel lighter. He nodded. You're not angry anymore. Oh, I am, I chuckled. But anger used to be a fire burning up everything inside me. Now it's just a candle, still lit but useful. Keeps me warm, keeps me alert. He smiled. Can I keep fighting too? He asked. Sweetheart, I built this for you to take over. And in that moment, I saw the next chapter. Not about punishment, but protection. Not just about justice, but legacy. The Ruth Initiative wasn't about me anymore. It was about making sure no one had to do what I did alone. I stood at the window the next morning, coffee in hand, watching fog roll over the Ohio River like a slow, steady breath. You know how some mornings feel like a clean slate? This one did, quiet, wide open, no court hearings, no phone calls from Eleanor or Luke, just silence and steam rising from my cup. And I realized it was the first time I'd woken up without checking the locks. That's how you know you're healing. Not when the pain disappears, but when the fear does. I'd started something real with the Ruth Initiative, something rooted in dignity and protection. We were opening a second center now, this one on the west side of Dayton. A safe place for older folks to ask hard questions and get honest answers about their rights, their money, their names. It wasn't flashy. It didn't smell like fresh paint or have a fountain in the lobby. But it had hot coffee people who listened and a phone line that always answered. And for the people who walked in, shaking, confused, scared, that no one would believe them, we believed them. That alone was revolutionary. One of the counselors, Dee, stopped by my office that afternoon. She's 67, fierce, and wears orthopedic shoes like they're a protest statement. We had a woman in today, she said. Her nephew's been pressuring her to sell her house and move into assisted living. Says it's for her safety. My stomach tensed. Did she say no? She said yes, until her friend showed her our flyer. Dee grinned. Now she's filing a restraining order and getting a full financial review. I smiled into my tea. There's nothing quite like helping someone find their no again. That's what this work had become. Not just protection, empowerment. Quirky fact of the day in 2019, the FBI reported that seniors lost more than $3 billion to financial scams and abuse, and most of it came from someone they knew. It doesn't make headlines, but it breaks homes. That's why the Ruth Initiative wasn't optional, it was urgent. A few days later, Luke and I hosted our first donor dinner. Nothing fancy, some string lights in the community garden, jazz music from an old Bluetooth speaker, and potluck pies from every grandma within 5 zip codes. The best kind of evening, really. As we passed plates and stories, I looked around at the faces of people who'd once felt discarded and now stood as fierce advocates for themselves and others. I leaned over to Luke. "You see this?" He nodded. "Yeah. This is what rebuilding looks like." And it was. Toward the end of the evening, a woman I didn't know approached me holding a photo. It was faded edges curled like it had lived in a wallet for years. "This is my mother," she said, Ruth Sanchez. "I saw your initiative name and I just had to say thank you." It's like her name is finally being spoken again, and for something good. I touched her hand, a quiet lump forming in my throat. She saved me once I whispered, "It's only right I make sure others get saved too." There's a wisdom that only comes from walking through fire. It tells you when to let go, when to hold firm, when to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. It's the kind of wisdom that lets you smile at the memory of pain and not flinch. I have that now. And I try to give a little of it away every day. Last week, I received a letter from Calvin. It was short, handwritten, no return address. It said, "I understand now. I wish I'd listened sooner. I hope someday you'll forgive me, C." I folded it carefully, placed it in the back of my drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't write back either. Forgiveness is a slow dance, and right now, I'm still learning the steps. There's a debate that comes up often at our town halls now. Should we focus more on prevention or response? Some argue we should pour every dollar into stopping abuse before it starts. Others say it's too late for some, and that response is where the impact lives. But I say both. Because the only thing worse than being taken advantage of is being told it's too late to do anything about it. Tonight, I sat by the fireplace rereading the first journal entry I wrote from that tiny house in rural Tennessee. It started, "They think I'm broken, but I'm still here." I closed the notebook gently and let the words settle. Still here, still standing, still fighting, but also still loving, still laughing, still learning how to live without the weight of proving I deserve to. What? My phone buzzed a photo from Luke. It was a selfie of him and 3 other student volunteers standing in front of our second center's grand opening banner. He captioned it, "She built the storm, not just the shelter." I smiled. Maybe that's what legacy really is. Not the money, not the verdicts or the headlines, but the people who carry your strength when you're no longer in the room. And I think I'm okay with that. Now that the story's been told, take a breath. Let the tension melt out of your shoulders. Let the quiet settle in like a warm quilt on a cold night. I'll talk softly now because we've been through so much together and I think you deserve to rest. You've just walked with me through betrayal, courage, fire, and freedom. You've seen how even the deepest hurt can bloom into something purposeful. And maybe, just maybe, you've seen a little of yourself in these words. If you've ever felt erased, invisible, like you were too old, too quiet, too forgotten to matter, I want you to know this. You are still here. You are not finished, and you are never too far gone to begin again. Life doesn't always offer apologies, but it does offer chances. 2nd, 3rd, 50th chances. And when the world stops handing them out, you go ahead and make your own. That's what I did. I stopped waiting for someone to open the door, and I built one. And if you're listening to this now, wherever you are, whatever time it is, I hope it reminds you that your voice still matters. Even if it shakes, even if it's been quiet for a long time. We don't fade just because they want us to. We rise, we rebuild, and sometimes we even forgive. So, sleep now if you can. You've earned it. And when you wake up, carry this story like a match in your pocket, because you never know when you'll need to light your own way forward.